I was 3 miles in when I noticed the man had no pack. No water bottle, nothing in his hands, just a guy in a gray hoodie, standing at the edge of the trail, watching me come around the bend. Everything that happened that day grew from that one small wrong thing. My name is Daniel. I've been hiking since my mid-20s. Day hikes, the occasional overnight. I know how to read a topo map and I know my limits. The Loyalsock State Forest up in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania has been my spot for going on 6 years. I know most of those trails the way you know the drive to work. I could walk sections of the Canyon Vista Loop in the dark. That Saturday in early October, I'd driven up from Williamsport alone. My usual hiking partner had a family thing. I left the trailhead off Route 87 around 7:30 in the morning. Low 50s, clear sky, the maples already burning orange and red across the ridge. It was exactly the kind of morning that reminds you why you do this at all. I texted my friend Marcus before I left, Canyon Vista Loop solo back by 4. He replied with a thumbs up. That was the extent of my check-in. I'll think about that for a long time. The first 2.5 miles were good. Hardwood canopy, the creek running fast and cold below the trail. A pair of grouse flushed out of a laurel thicket and scared me worse than anything else with that day. I stopped at the overlook around mile 2, ate half a granola bar, took a photo of the valley below, all fall color. I kept moving. That's when I came around a long switchback and saw him. He was standing just off the trail to the right, facing me. The gray hoodie had no logo, dark jeans, trail runners that were too clean for someone who'd walked in from the road, no day pack, no hydration vest, no fanny pack, nothing. I almost said something friendly. I do that on trail, but the way he was standing stopped me. Most people standing off trail have a reason. They're looking at something, checking their phone, stepping aside to let someone pass. He wasn't doing any of that. He was just standing there watching me approach with his hands down at his sides. I gave him a nod and kept walking. "You hiking alone today?" he said. I said yeah, just a loop, and I kept moving, didn't break stride. "What's your name?" he said, behind me now. I told him I don't know why, reflex being polite. "You coming off Route 87, he asked, "leave a car up there?" I slowed just enough to half turn. "Yeah," I said, "you." He didn't answer that, he just smiled, no warmth in it at all. I turned back and walked faster. For the next 10 minutes I kept myself calm with explanations. Local guy out for a stroll. A little odd, sure, but people are odd. He wasn't following me. I just needed to put some distance between us and the day would reset. Then I came around the next switchback heading up toward the ridge, and he was there. Ahead of me. Not behind me, ahead, standing on the uphill section of trail maybe 40 yards up looking back down at me. Same hoodie, same stillness. I stopped walking. There was no shortcut. I knew this trail. The only way to get from where he'd been to where he was now was past me. I hadn't heard a single footstep. I stood there trying to find the logic in it. Maybe it wasn't the same person. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, but maybe a different guy entirely. Except the trail runners were the same shade of white-gray, and the way he was standing was identical, that particular blankness. I looked back down the trail, empty. I looked back up. He turned and walked into the tree line and was gone. My stomach dropped. I thought about turning back right then. I actually turned around and stared down the trail toward the trailhead. But 3 miles out, 3 miles back, I knew this loop. I knew every access point. The fastest way out was still forward, looping around to the north before the trail swung back down to the lot. That was bad reasoning. I know that now. I pulled out my phone, 1 bar. I texted Marcus, weird guy on trail, going to push through and come out the north end. Then I kept moving, fast now, eyes on the tree line. A 1/4 mile below the ridgeline, I passed a wildlife camera mounted to a beech tree. I'd noticed it before on previous hikes, Forest Service or a hunting club setup, nothing unusual. But as I passed it, I looked at it. The front housing had been smashed, the lens was cracked, someone had hit it with something hard, there was a fresh dent in the top of the casing. You don't smash a trail camera on accident. I started moving faster. At the ridge junction, there's a wooden sign with arrows, left for the overlook spur, right to continue the loop. Both arrows were rotated. The loop direction was pointing left, the spur was pointing right. Someone had loosened the bolts and turned them. A hiker who didn't know the trail would go left, toward the spur, dead end, thick timber, no sight lines to the main trail. I went right, running now, basically. The ridge trail is open for about half a mile, low scrub on both sides, long views. I was scanning constantly, I didn't see him. Then, just before the trail dips back into the hardwoods on the north slope, I heard footsteps in the leaves. Off to my left, not an animal, a two-beat pattern, bipedal, unhurried. I stopped and looked. He was moving through the trees about 30 yards off trail, parallel to me, not crashing through brush, moving steadily like he knew exactly where the ground was soft. He wasn't looking at me. He was just walking the same direction I was walking, through the woods off the trail. That's when my body knew, not my brain, my body. My hands went cold, my mouth dried out completely. Everything in me said, go now. I ran. Not a jog, I ran hard downhill north slope where the trail gets rocky and steep. I turned my ankle twice and didn't slow down. I could hear my own breathing and my own footsteps and nothing else. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know. About a mile down the north slope, the trail crosses a fire road. There's a gate and beyond it a gravel pull-off where hunters sometimes park. There was a truck there that morning. An older Dodge Ram, diesel, Sullivan County Hunting Club sticker in the rear window. Two men in blaze orange were loading gear into the bed. I came out of the trees and the closer one turned around and took one look at me and said, "You all right?" I told him no. I told him there was a man on the trail who kept appearing in front of me, who had been walking through the woods parallel to my route, who had no pack, no water, nothing. Neither of them said a word to each other. The older man just said, "Get in the truck." They drove me down the fire road to Route 87. My car was in the lot where I'd left it. We sat there for a minute. The older man said he'd heard of people working trails up in that section. Moving signs, smashing cameras. He said he didn't know what the goal was, but that it wasn't nothing. I drove to the ranger station on Ogdonia Road and filed a report. The ranger who took it was a woman named Hartley. She didn't seem surprised. She asked me the same questions twice and took notes by hand. She said the smashed camera wasn't the first one they'd found on that trail system. Said there had been sign vandalism in the same corridor over the past few months. She asked me to describe the man. Gray hoodie, dark jeans, clean white-gray trail runners, calm face, absolutely calm. She wrote it all down and said she'd pass it to the county sheriff's office. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel the whole way. About 4 months later, in February, I came across a brief item in the Williamsport Sun-Gazette online. State police were asking for information about a man who'd assaulted a hiker on a trail in Sullivan County the previous fall. The victim was described as a woman hiking alone. The date in the article was 2 Saturdays after my trip. Same trail system, same general corridor. I called Ranger Hartley's station and gave them my earlier report number. The officer I spoke to said they'd pull it. I don't know what happened after that. I never heard back. Marcus asked me about the day when I finally told him, a couple weeks after it happened. He'd seen my text. He'd been worried when I turned up an hour late and then went quiet. I walked him through the whole thing. When I got to the part about the man appearing ahead of me on the trail, Marcus went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You didn't go back up there, right?" I've been up to Loyalsock twice since. Different trailheads, different corridors. I don't do the Canyon Vista Loop anymore. The smashed camera is what I keep coming back to. That was preparation. That wasn't someone out for a walk. Someone went up there before hikers arrived and removed the eyes from that section of trail. That takes planning. That takes knowing which cameras exist and where they point. And those turned signs. If I hadn't known that trail, I would have gone left, into the spur, into the trees. Text someone your trailhead and your expected return time before you go. When something feels wrong out there, it is wrong. You don't need to find a reason. You can just turn around. And if the man ahead of you has no pack and no water, he didn't hike in the way you did. He asked me to come after 10, said he worked nights. I told myself that was normal. My name is Garrett. I was 26, living in a one-bedroom outside of Knoxville, East Tennessee. I'd been out of work for about 6 weeks after the warehouse I stocked at closed down. Rent was 2 weeks out and I was short, not desperate, but close enough that desperate was visible from where I stood. I'd listed a vintage Craftsman tool chest on Facebook Marketplace. My grandfather left it to me. I'd kept it 2 years thinking I'd use it, but I wasn't a mechanic and I was never going to be one. 10 drawers, original chrome pulls, a few surface scratches. I listed it for $350. That would cover the rent gap and leave me enough for groceries. The first few messages were lowballers, $50, $120. One guy offered a trade for a generator he apparently didn't know had already been sold. Standard marketplace noise. Then Marcus messaged me. His profile looked normal enough, a few months old. Profile photo was a guy in a Carhartt jacket, maybe mid-40s, outdoor setting. one review from a previous sale, 3 stars, no comment. I didn't think much of it. He said he was looking for exactly that chest for his garage. He asked reasonable questions, drawer condition, whether the slides were still smooth. I answered everything. He said he'd take it at full price, no negotiating, cash. I said I could meet at the Home Depot off Clinton Highway the next day. Public lot, busy enough, good lighting even in the evening. That was always my rule. He came back about an hour later, said the Home Depot didn't work for him. The chest was going in his garage and he'd need help getting it off my truck. Could I just swing by his place? He'd throw in an extra 20 for the trouble. I said sure, asked for the address. It was in Granger County, about 40 minutes out, well past the last gas station I knew of on that stretch. A county road off Route 11W. I'd driven 11W a dozen times. I knew exactly where it started going rural. His address was past that point. I told him I could do it around 6 the following evening, still daylight. He said he got off work at 9, could I come at 10? That was the moment, I know that now. I should have said no and moved on. I needed the money and I told myself there was nothing actually wrong. People work late, people live out in the county. I had a full tank in my F-150 and I knew the roads. I said 10 was fine. The next evening I loaded the chest into the truck bed by myself, heavy piece of furniture. I had to use a dolly and a ramp I'd borrowed from my neighbor. Took about 20 minutes and I was sweating by the time I had it strapped down. The October air had gone cold fast that week. By the time I finished I could see my breath under the parking lot light. My hands were stiff. I remember thinking I should have worn gloves. I texted Marcus that I was on my way. He read it and didn't reply. I pulled out of my complex around 9:15. The drive up 11W was normal at first. Gas stations, a Hardee's, a few used car lots with strings of pennant flags hanging dead still in the cold. Past Rutledge the road gets quiet fast, fields, tree lines, farm gates with no lights on, the kind of dark that has weight to it. You become aware that there are long stretches where no one would see you pull over. No one would hear anything either. I'd driven that road in daylight without noticing. At night I noticed. The radio was on low, a country station fading in and out as the signal went spotty. Mostly what I heard was road noise and the faint shift of the chest against the tie-down straps in the bed. At 9:50 Marcus texted me. He said there was construction blocking his road. He was sending an alternate address. I pulled over. The shoulder there was gravel and loose dirt. When I stopped I could really hear it, or hear the absence of it. No traffic in either direction, no lit houses. The fields on both sides of 11W were just blackness past my headlights. Somewhere out in that blackness something was moving through brush. Some animal, probably. I sat there and listened to it and didn't like that I couldn't see what it was. The new address was 4 miles north, a different county road entirely, one I didn't recognize. I typed it into Google Maps. The pin landed in the middle of nothing. No street view, no listed businesses. The satellite image showed trees and what might have been a clearing. No structures I could make out, no utility lines running in, just canopy. I sat there with the engine running. The cab was warm, the heater was on, but I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the specific discomfort of knowing something was wrong without yet being willing to name it. I texted back and asked what the cross street was. He said there wasn't one, just follow the GPS. I asked if he could come out to the road and wave me in. He didn't answer for 3 minutes. The truck idled. I watched the read receipt. Nothing. I looked in my mirrors. Empty road in both directions. White dashes on the center line disappearing into dark. There was a smell coming through the vents, something agricultural, turned soil or manure from a nearby field, the kind of smell that means farmland in the daytime. At 9:50 at night on a road with no one on it, it just meant I was far from anything. Then he said, "You coming alone?" Not asking if I'd found the new address, not confirming I was close, just that one question. I went cold. I looked at my mirrors, dark road, no headlights either direction. I was parked on the shoulder of a county road in Granger County at 9:50 at night with $350 of furniture in my truck bed, and the man I was supposed to be selling it to had just asked if I was alone. I thought about the profile, few months old. One review, no comment, the way he hadn't negotiated, full price right away, like the price was never the point. The chest was the reason to get me out there, that was all it was. I've thought about that moment a lot in the years since. There was no single thing I could have handed a police report and called a crime. But the combination of it, the late hour, the remote redirect, the silence before that question, the question itself, it assembled into a shape I recognized. My body understood before my brain finished the sentence. My foot was already moving toward the brake. I put the truck in drive. I called my friend Derek while I was moving. I didn't explain everything. I just said I was on a marketplace run that felt wrong and I was driving away. Stay on the phone with me. He didn't ask questions, just talked, something about a game he'd been watching. I barely heard the words, but his voice in the cab helped and I was grateful for it. I drove south on 11W and kept my eyes on the mirrors. About 2 miles back toward Rutledge, I saw headlights. They held about a quarter-mile back. I sped up a little. They matched it. I slowed down. They slowed. The road was straight enough there that I could watch them clearly. Same distance every time. Every adjustment I made, they made. I kept Derek on the line and told him what I was seeing. He stopped talking about the game. I hit the Hardys just past Rutledge. I turned in hard and pulled to the lit side of the building near the drive-thru. The headlights went past on 11W without slowing. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes. The Hardys was still open, a couple of cars in the lot, a teenager in a visor visible through the drive-thru window. I left the truck running and the doors locked. I watched 11W in both directions. Nothing came back. The parking lot lights were orange-yellow sodium, and I was glad for every one of them. Marcus sent 2 more messages while I sat there. First one said, "Where are you?" Second one said, "I drove out to the road and you weren't here." I didn't answer either of them. I drove home with the tool chest still in the bed, got back after midnight. I unstrapped the chest in my parking lot and left it sitting there. I didn't have the energy to move it back inside. The next morning I reported the conversation to Marketplace and sent screenshots of both addresses and that last message to the Knox County non-emergency line. The deputy I talked to went quieter than I expected when I read him that final text. He asked me to send everything to an email address he gave me. He told me they'd had a few reports with a similar pattern coming out of that county. Different items listed, same general area, buyers pushing for late hours and remote addresses. He said none of the previous people had actually shown up. He seemed to mean that as a good thing. Marcus's profile was gone by noon. I checked a few times, not deactivated, not suspended, just absent like it had never been there. I relisted the tool chest the following week. Met the buyer at the Walmart on Clinton Highway at 2 in the afternoon. His wife came with him. They brought their own dolly. The whole thing took 8 minutes. I still think about those headlights on 11W, whether they were his or just a coincidence. I've never been able to settle that. I don't think I want to. I came home one night and found my back door unlocked, and I knew right then that I'd been right for months. My name is Derek, I'm 31. I work IT support for a logistics company out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I bought a small house on Ridgecrest Drive about 2 years ago. Quiet street, older neighborhood, the kind where people wave from their driveways and know which cars belong and which ones don't. I live alone. I have a routine. I'm not someone who spooks easy. I want to say that up front, because this kind of thing creeps in so slowly you start to doubt yourself before you ever do anything about it. The first time I noticed him, I didn't think much of it. It was a Tuesday in late October. I was pulling into my driveway after work, headlights sweeping the street, and I saw a man standing on the sidewalk across from my house. Just standing there, not walking, not looking at his phone, watching my car pull in. It was cold that night, damp October cold, and he wasn't moving the way a person moves when they're uncomfortable in the weather. He was still, patient. I figured he lived nearby. Maybe he'd stepped out for air. I went inside. I forgot about it. The second time was about a week later. I was at the Circle K on Chapman Highway grabbing coffee before my shift. Same man in the parking lot, mid-40s, stocky build, gray jacket, hair cut close on the sides. He was leaning against an older Dodge Ram maroon, one of the rear panels dented in. He was looking at me. When I looked back, he got in the truck and left. I noted it, that's all. Then my neighbor Mrs. Patton knocked on my door one afternoon in early November. She's 70, sharp as a tack, out in her yard most mornings. She said a man had been walking along the side of my house around noon that day. She thought maybe he was a repairman. She watched him for a few minutes. He didn't knock. He didn't carry tools. He walked back to the street and left. I thanked her. I walked the side of the house. Nothing disturbed. I checked the side gate. It was latched. Then I started paying attention. Mid-November, I ordered a package from Amazon, a cable management kit, nothing exciting. It was scanned as delivered on a Wednesday. When I got home Thursday evening, the box was on my porch, opened. The tape was cut clean. The contents were still inside, but someone had gone through them. Items shifted. The packing slip unfolded and set back in loose. I called Amazon. They confirmed the driver scanned it intact. That meant someone opened it after he left. I called the non-emergency line. An officer came out, took a report, told me it was probably a porch pirate who lost interest. I nodded. I didn't believe him. I bought a camera, one camera covering the front porch. It didn't catch anything notable for 2 weeks, then it caught him. December 4th, 11:17 at night. A stocky man in a gray jacket walked up to my porch, stood in front of the door for about 40 seconds, then walked back to the street. He didn't knock, he didn't leave anything, he just stood there. I watched that footage 4 times. I couldn't confirm it was the man from the Circle K, the angle wasn't right for his face, but the jacket matched, the build matched. I called the police again, different officer. He told me without a face or a plate, there wasn't much they could do. He said to keep recording. I ordered 3 more cameras. The second week of December, I was at work when a woman in my department named Rachel stopped by my desk. She said someone had called the front desk asking for me by name. Said he was a contractor who'd done some work at my house and needed to reach me. The receptionist told him I wasn't available. He hung up without leaving a number. I have had no contractors at my house. I've done everything myself. I went cold. I was careful driving home that night. I watched my mirrors all the way down Interstate 75, then down Chapman, then onto Ridgecrest. I didn't see the maroon Ram. But when I got home, I found my side gate unlatched. I always latch that gate, always. I had checked it 2 days before. It was a specific kind of latch, a steel drop bar, not something that blows open in wind. The bar sat in a slotted bracket bolted directly into the fence post. You had to lift it deliberately and set it aside. Wind doesn't do that. Kids cutting through don't do that. Someone who had been studying my property does that. I stood at the edge of my driveway and looked at that open gate. The street was quiet. The motion light on Mrs. Patton's garage was on, probably a cat. I stood there in the December cold and felt something shift inside me. Not panic, something worse than panic. A slow, settling certainty. I didn't go around back alone. I called a friend named Marcus. He came over. We walked the yard together. Nothing disturbed, nobody hiding. But someone had been back there. I called the police again that night. I had the camera footage, the open package report, Mrs. Patton's statement, and now the gate. The officer who came, older guy, took his time, said it sounded like someone was testing the property. He said that was how it often started. He filed a report and told me to document everything with dates. That phrase stayed with me all night, testing the property. I ordered new deadbolts for every door the next morning. And then came the thing that made it real. I came home from work on a Thursday in the 3rd week of December. There was a small box on my porch, wrapped in brown paper, my first name written on it in black marker, not my last name, not my address, just Derek. Inside was a coffee mug, plain white, no note. I stood there on the porch for a long time holding that box. The light was on. The street behind me was empty. Everything looked completely normal, the same bare trees, the same yellow glow from Mrs. Patton's windows, the same cracked seam in the concrete at the bottom porch step I'd been meaning to patch. Everything looked normal and none of it was. My name in that handwriting meant he'd closed some distance I hadn't known he was crossing. He wasn't watching from a parking lot anymore. He was standing where I was standing. He had written my name. That's when I knew there was no explanation left. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had been watching me long enough to learn my first name, long enough to know my routine, long enough to feel comfortable leaving something at my front door. I put the mug in a Ziploc bag without touching it more than I already had. I called the police. I called Marcus. I did not sleep in my house that night. The detective who caught my case was named Samuels. She was thorough. She pulled the footage from my cameras, pulled the Circle K parking lot footage from November, and got a partial plate on the maroon Ram. The truck came back registered to a man named Carl Emery, 47 years old. He lived about 4 miles away in a rental house. He had a prior from 2019, a stalking charge out of Bradley County that ended in a deferred sentence. He had done this before. Samuels told me that when she went to talk to him, she found photographs on his kitchen counter, printed out photographs. Some of them were of me, getting into my car, walking to my mailbox. One of them was taken from the side yard looking toward my back porch. He had been in my backyard. I've thought about that photograph a lot, the angle of it, the way it was framed. Whoever took it was standing close to the fence on the east side of my yard, maybe 10 feet from the back door. They stood there long enough to raise a camera and compose a shot, not a quick snap, a deliberate one. I think about what I must have been doing on the other side of that door, in my kitchen, in my living room. I think about how many times I had stood at the back window with the light on inside and looked out at nothing but my own reflection in the glass. They arrested him that same day, violation of probation from the Bradley County case plus the new charges. Samuels called me that evening. He was in custody. I sat on my kitchen floor for about 20 minutes after that call. I changed every lock that weekend, upgraded the deadbolts to Schlage B60s, added a heavy steel security bar on the back door, the kind that braces against the floor and doesn't care what lock you've picked. I kept all 4 cameras running and added a motion light in the side yard. Marcus stayed with me for a week. I filed for a protective order and got it. Carl Emery took a plea in February, 18 months, probation, and a mandatory no-contact order. I didn't move. I thought about it hard, but Ridgecrest Drive is my street. Mrs. Patton still waves from her yard every morning. I decided I wasn't going to let him take that from me too. It's been about 8 months since the arrest. Things are quiet. But I still check the side gate every night before I go to sleep.